the recording, so whenever you're ready.
All right. So we will open the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, June 2nd at 6:30. We will rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So since we are not all in the same room, are we doing a roll call for attendance?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. Commissioner Stevens.
I think he's muted, but he's there.
Okay, now to unmute Greg.
Yes, here.
Okay. Commissioner Wolthius.
Here.
Commissioner Parker.
Here.
Commissioner Journey.
Present.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Commissioner Melcher. Commissioner Lohman.
Yes.
Make sure you guys turn on your microphones before you talk.
All right. So at this point in our Planning Commission, this is the moment for any public comment related to anything that is not part of tonight's discussion. And we have none. So moving on.
You want to say anything?
No.
You're just
Really?
I assumed you had something to.
Let the record show that Thomas Bayham refused to speak. We got that, right? Okay, I see it. All right, so I guess we'll just, are we going to jump into code review, or do we want to go slightly out of order? Or I guess the food pods is part of it.
We need to approve
We
the
need to look at
minutes
the
from
minutes.
last
The minutes aren't on
month
here.
first.
Do we have copies of last? I don't have any.
No, the minutes aren't, they'll be on the next agenda.
Okay. So I will turn it over to staff for draft code review.
Do you want me to, Blair, do you want me to pop in with the food pod?
Yeah. Did you want to talk about that first?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll
That's
go ahead.
Probably more the interest for.
Yeah, so the reason why we put this example in there is we've had a lot of interest lately in creating like food courts with food pods and, you know, all of the different food trucks. We currently do not have a food pod criteria. So I took Lebanon's, and that's the example that you have, because we have much interest and we need to come up with some sort of criteria in order to, I guess, deal with all of these that are wanting to come in here, you know, as far as, you know, the rules and regulations hooking up to water and sewer, you know, setback requirements, land use requirements. We don't have any of that. So we're having to use what little land use criteria we have in order to try to bring these things in. And so I wanted to just throw this out at you guys and see what you think and get the feel for whether you would like to add a food pod criteria to our criteria. Just to help, because this is the new fad and this is not going to go away anytime soon. So that was the reason behind we don't really need to go into detail. I gave it to you to review, but if there's things that you want to discuss with that, then I thought we could leave it open to that.
And Angela, is there anything, without delving into this more in depth at the moment, is there anything about how long a trailer can be parked in one spot before it needs to be moved as far as a temporary structure?
Well, so there's a couple different things that they have in here. They have a, let me scroll real quick. They have their food pod regulations. There is a temporary, kind of a temporary code, and then there's like a permanent, kind of like what the barn would be and what Lebanon's going to be. So they have a couple different codes in here. There's the mobile food preparation units. You know, that's a temporary use permit. That's one of the ones that they have. And then there's the actual pods, which is more like the barn. So it kind of depends on the situation of, and you know, when I put this together, it's been a couple days since I've read this. So, but the mobile food preparation code, which is on page, I don't know, it's on 2.4, because you have a couple different examples there. That's a temporary use. It's from a vehicle, temporary structure. Let me see. Can't occupy more than 100 square feet. Anyway, this is, and it says address with a limited number of 365 extensions. Each extension all require a new permit. So they have a year, then they've got to renew it. So it kind of depends on what the circumstance is. If it's like a, I don't know, like a community thing where they have the barn and then they have all the food pods around it, or if it's a one on an individual site. And that's what kind of Sweet Home we kind of need to determine. We have both, right? Well, we have individual ones right now, but we are getting proposed for kind of more of the unit type. We have 2 that are possibly coming up for approval here soon. So, and they don't go in front of Planning Commission right now. So I know that didn't answer your question, but I don't know all the details of all of it. I just kind of went through some of their criteria and kind of looked at what was close to us.
Yeah, it kind of answers the question. I guess we just have to delineate between mobile food prep unit and pod. I mean, is pod something with no axles?
So no, the pod is the collection
Is
of
the
them,
collective
is the
unit
plural
of-
of, you know,
Okay.
if you have a site with multiple pads
Okay,
that can handle multiple food carts, that would be altogether be a pod.
okay.
Yeah. A lot of people call it a court, so either a pod or a food court. So it's kind of the pod. The individual one would just be the mobile food, and then the pod would be the multiple ones around like a general seating area type of thing.
And for a
like
lot of
court.
cities, having an individual food cart that sets up is not really that big of an issue. A lot of times they're not required to have restroom facilities.
No.
A lot of times they're allowed to set up in the public right of way as long as they're not blocking traffic and as long as they're not staying there for more than one day. They can set up one day on one place and then go to somewhere else the next day. That's all fine, and that's all can be handled by our existing code and existing rules. Very few people do that these days for whatever reason. I think people like the dependability of knowing where to find you,
Right.
and that kind of thing. But having food trucks that are there basically permanently, that's a new thing for us. And I think the important thing for tonight is mainly to get an idea from all of you whether you think this should be outright permitted in the downtown zone, for example, or any particular zone, or whether you think there should be criteria for how they're set up, the number of units per net acre or something like that
Right.
for a parcel. So getting some ideas from all of you on what you think is important for us to focus on, and we can take that information then and draft something that would come back before you for consideration to be added to the code.
I've been to several of them, Salem, Albany, even Lebanon. I think it's great. We don't have a lot of eating places here now. So if we would get one, then, hopefully, there'd be maybe 10 carts. So that gives us 10 more restaurants or so to go to. And it brings people out. And it seems like every place I've been to them, they're having a good time, because like the barn, they have a major building with that serves the beer and stuff, and they have music going, and people just like to get out and mingle with people. So I think it would also bring people into our city, Brownsville, or people would come into our city because it give more choices for food. So to me, I'm for it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of it makes sense. It's what we have to figure out as far as, like you said, how many carts are allowed per lot square footage based on parking needs. I'm sure at some point, is there a number of carts before you have to require event style restrooms? Or, if it was a pod or a food court, pod for me doesn't make sense, so I'm going to call it food court.
Sure.
At some point, you would have a permanent building, much like the barn, with restroom facilities and things like that. But I guess it's just, I'd hate to see somebody take a piece of land, cram it full of food carts, and then you have nowhere to park. Because
Right.
as we've all discussed in the past, parking is terrible downtown.
So the main things, the main things I would recommend is density. Like we
Right.
talked about, how many units you could have in a per 1,000 square feet or whatever.
Right.
Restroom. It sounds like restrooms would be desired to be a requirement. But things that would be helpful to staff is things like the paving. Do they have to be in a paved parking lot, or is a gravel parking lot sufficient?
Yeah.
What's the separation between units? How close together can they be?
Is there anything fire code wise that we can look at for that, based on the fact that most of them are going to have an exterior propane bottle?
In some ways, the fire code is a little bit, and I haven't done an in-depth look into fire code, but one of the problems is when a lot of times codes are different for temporary facilities.
Right.
And when you have a facility that's on wheels, it's often seen as temporary, even though it's there all the time. And so it can be argued that it would be in a gray area.
That's why I was.
And that's
going
why
for
having a specific code is more helpful, because it says, okay, we know that you're a mobile unit, but this is the rules for mobile units in this.
Yeah, and that's why I was going. That's where I was going with Angela and the time frame. I mean, it's a mobile unit. How long can it stay physically in one spot before it has to be towed out for 24 hours and then brought back?
Well, do you want that to be a
reset
requirement?
it? I think at some point. I mean, I like
the
the fact that it's a unlimited 365-day extensions, so they'd be renewed every year. A lot of that will have to do with the property owner as well, as far as if they're going to do month to month, which they probably wouldn't. They'd want leases for 6 months, 8 months, just so they had somebody consistently through the summer.
So are you interested then in making sure that the trucks have to move after a certain period of time?
So
Do you want them to move, or do you want them just to renew? Because do they have to physically get up and move and come back, or can they just renew their permit? So that there's two different things going on there of whether they have to,
Well,
unlike an RV that has to move every 7 days.
Right.
Do we
And
really need them
I
to
guess
move?
I was thinking of if it moves versus if it stays there, then we can still call it a mobile food prep unit. But if it's allowed to park there and it doesn't have to move and they just renew, then they could argue that they're not a mobile prep unit because it's sitting there. Because most of them long-term park, take their tires and wheels off, and then lower them down to a more acceptable height. I know about half of them at the barn are like that.
I think you could do that with the definitions of, basically in the definitions of the code, that you're still going to consider it a mobile food unit, even if you've removed the tires.
Right.
If it was originally built as a trailer, it's still considered a mobile food unit.
Okay.
And, everyone I've been to, they've all been paved. Because I would think if we allowed them to have gravel, we're going to have a big dust area with people coming in and blowing into the food carts.
Yeah.
So I would
It also
think
makes
it
it
would
more
send.
difficult to determine parking when it's a gravel parking lot.
And it does rain once in a while in Oregon, so it might get muddy.
I have
Well,
a
one of,
we're starting from scratch.
You turn your mic on, please.
I thought I had it on.
There you go.
There you go.
I have a feeling that we're starting from scratch. And I suspect that it would be a good thing for us to find out what has gone on elsewhere, identify what their problems have been, what their benefits have been, and what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And then we're in a little better place to start
So
writing some of
Angela,
these things.
we do have example code from Lebanon.
This is
We
Lebanon's.
can provide Albany's code as well. And but we can also reach out to their planning departments and find out if they've had any problems.
The biggest downfall is parking, because I've been there, not necessarily always on a Friday or Saturday, even through the week. There isn't enough parking because people actually go there because, they can have choices of food. I think, we should have a little better parking than some of those other cities because it fills up and people don't have no place to park, and they're parking in places that I think is not legal to get into it.
Yeah, the problem is that also limits possibilities in the downtown. In our code revision, we're actually eliminating the parking requirement for redeveloping properties in the downtown core, because it's very difficult for a developer to be able to create land where everything's already crammed in. And the idea is that with something like this, if it was in the downtown, people would be required to walk from their car to the place and pass by multiple retail shops on their way to there. And so it would drive that circulation of pedestrians and hopefully be an amenity to help the nearby businesses.
But do we have big enough space downtown to do something like this?
We do.
We do.
And to back up Blair, so if you go to any other town, you know, areas like this, I've been to a few of them now. This is something that you want that helps make your downtown more walkable. You know, we might not have parking garages and whatnot, but there are places to park down there. You just might have to walk a block or two. So we have plenty of parking. It's just getting people used to that walkability of your downtown and going from point A, you know, not being able to park right next to an activity doesn't mean we don't have parking. So, you know, you kind of have to look at it a little bit different view of how the downtown's going to be utilized. And there is plenty of parking. It's just people might have to walk a block or two in order to get there. So, you know, keep that in mind when we're looking at downtown areas is, you know, there is parking. It's just not right in the vicinity, you know, right next to where you want to put something sometimes.
That's something that came out from the streetscape plan and the parking study that was a part of that. Was it really analyzed, went pretty much in depth, and that document's available on the website for everybody to read. It went into pretty good depth on what available parking there is, where additional parking could be allocated in the public right of way. But again, the problem is you have some disagreements with different property owners about who can park where. We want to encourage that cooperation because it's really in every property owner's best interest to share and share alike, because that all drives that circulation of people and customers in the downtown. And part of it is a public perception of helping people realize if you want to have this experience, this is intended not to be a convenience thing where you drive in, get your food and drive home. This is intended to be an experience where you come and you enjoy the experience of that food truck court and the shops that are around it, and hopefully spend your money in more than just that one place.
Right. So going back to something you said just before we kind of went down this trail. So did I understand that we are removing the parking requirement for commercial real estate?
The new draft essentially says, yes, if you're redeveloping a downtown business, because you're located in the downtown and there is limits on the available land that you can find, then there aren't these requirements anymore for trying to find enough parking.
But this just goes for
it takes on
existing structure.
Right. Okay. It puts the burden on the city to ensure that there continues to be parking in the downtown, and that the city will need to take more action on that in the future, whether that's in partnership with the chamber and other businesses and getting easements or negotiating agreements with parking people who own the properties, or whether it's the city acquiring property itself.
Right.
You know, so that's we'll need to make sure that that's understood by the public, and that we are taking an active role in our downtown.
So I think it's important to have this in our code, and the sooner the better, because clearly there's interest and it's kind of a back and forth. We want to do it right and pay attention to details, but we also don't want to let our customers wait months and months while we figure this out. So that's kind of in your ballpark. I think it should not be outright permitted, that there should definitely be parameters so there's some control.
You think it should be a conditional use where it has to come before the planning commission, or should there be parameters that staff can review?
Well, I'm not sure about that yet, but one or the other of those I think is important.
Well, it would definitely be one or the other.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend, because right now we basically have a blanket. We don't have a rule against it.
Right.
And
we need some structure. So however we decide that structure is best served, that would be the way to go. And just a comment about paved versus gravel, definitely not for gravel because of the sanitary situation. You've got people dropping crumbs and food and whatever else, and at least if you have a covered area, you could spray it off.
Sprayer sweeper or something.
So that would be important. And so this shouldn't be a surprise to us that this is here now. I mean, I wish we could have anticipated this a year or two ago and had this already taken care of. As I've spoken about Airbnbs, I know that's not quite in our bailiwick, but we should already have had some sort of ordinance related to that, because those are businesses that are alive and well in the rest of the world. So I think, and about the parking and walking, if you have a food court, people will come. They will find a place to park, and if they have to walk a block, they'll walk a block. I don't know that that's particularly, except for people who have limitations and need a parking place close to wherever, but for others.
And I agree. I mean, I agree with Ava, and it needs to be a conditional use, because just for that fact, then we can have a little control over making sure that there's some handicap parking situated in certain certain arrangements or designs.
Well, that can be accomplished in the code too. I mean,
Right.
with staff review, you can specify handicap parking needs to be present within a certain distance, either on the property itself or on adjacent properties, with agreement of the property owner or commitment by that property owner.
So Blair,
Yeah.
commissioners, so right now the two we are reviewing them under the so the like restaurant criteria, because we do have criteria for eateries, restaurants, that kind of thing. So we are reviewing it under that, and the two that we are reviewing, we are requiring handicap spaces in them. We are requiring buildings, they have to hook up to water. So because we don't have a code, the two that we are looking at, we are using that commercial restaurant code right now to kind of, and even when it comes to parking spaces, we're going with the overall square footage, and that's been kind of an iffy thing, but because we don't have any other code, that's how we're doing it. And so we are catching the handicap. We're making sure there's handicap spaces, there's spaces for bathrooms, so we just need something. What we're coming to you for is, yes, we're using the code we have and to the best of our ability, but we're coming to you to say, do you want us to research getting more specific to just these food courts themselves, so that we have just direct, this is what we're going to do, this, and this. And so we are using our code to the best of our ability right now for the ones that we're reviewing, but we've noticed, we don't want there to be gray areas, which there is right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if we have pushback from an applicant on something that we're asking them to do, and they're going to say, well, we don't fit into that category, and all we can say is, well, we think you do. It's better to have a clear code that backs us up and gives more clarity to the applicant.
So more detail, the better
So
at this point, because it's a new thing.
I really feel like, so the Lebanon code that Angela provided for us, it really hits on all the things that we've been talking about that we're concerned on. Like the structure of their plan builds those all in, like parking. So they have 2 parking spaces per, but maybe we'd want 3 because we want more parking, because we might have more trailers or, boats coming through. So maybe there might be need for more. They have restroom requirements built right in for the food pods. So like those food courts where they have seating and things, it says if you have seating, you have to have restrooms available for hand washing and things. And so like the way their code is set out, I think it really does set a good structure for us to be able to say, this will work for Sweet Home. Let's figure out what our specifics are here. It has a lot of those things. So I really appreciate you, Angela, finding this and providing it for us.
Yeah, not a problem.
Because things like gravel and pave, there's areas where we can add that into their code to make it work for us.
It does go into great detail, but I do believe with it not being a permanent structure for the most part, it still needs to be a conditional use permit. So,
Well, the pod, the development would be permanent. The individual food trucks would not be. And so the idea is those would move in and out, but there would be an approved number of spaces that the owner would not be able to go beyond. They'd be set.
It's basically an RV park for food.
Kind of,
parks.
yeah. And just like we want to make sure we have good rules for RV parks, because once they're built, you don't have that much control over them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you say a conditional use for it, but if we have they have this much square footage, they are only allowed, this many pods because they have to have rooms for bathrooms and whatnot, that would still limit them, so I'm not sure the necessity of the conditional use permit if it's in the C2 zone, say in the C2 zone, this is all right permitted, but if it's in another zone, then maybe it's a conditional use, but we can do it literally, like you just brought up, kind of like a mobile home park. You know,
Yeah.
they're allowed this many spaces. If one moves out, one can move in, but you can't go beyond that limit. And it's got to have the hookups. It's got to have certain amenities in order to do it. So what I can do is I will take the Lebanon's code and I will kind of work it into something that would work for us and maybe look at Albany's a little bit to see if there's any differences with Albany's and then come back with maybe a draft.
And I
Not-
agree with Blair too, reaching out to say Albany to see what they've kind of encountered through the barn project, see what's worked and what hasn't.
Yeah, we can do that.
And was it Tall? Is it Tall Man
Tallman
in Lebanon
Brewing
that
in
just
Lebanon?
opened?
Oh, yeah.
I just went there on Friday.
Mhm. I've been there a few
Had some
times.
great Greek
Yeah,
food. It was
food's good.
awesome.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. It's nice to have it around.
Yeah.
But it seems like, all the owners that own those food courts, I guess they have the revenue off the beer sales, and
That's one
and
model, yeah.
they have, they provide the restrooms because they
And
serve the
indoor
beer and
seating.
stuff,
Mhm.
and then all the trailer courts or the food trailers,
Mhm.
they don't do the bathroom. It's the owner that supplies the bathroom for
You know,
the
the really
customers.
the really nice thing about that setup for people is that there doesn't have to be a commercial kitchen inside the building where they want to have the tap house. So they can use a different commercial property and then still provide food with alcohol. So it makes it quicker for them. And then also they can fit everybody's appetite
Yeah.
there.
We went to one in Bend actually a few weeks ago, and it was that same model, but they even had like a one of those long fire tables with basically an outdoor fireplace.
Mhm.
It was there for all the people to enjoy as well, and it was just really really well set up. They even had one of the food trucks was a double-decker bus,
Oh,
like a British double-decker bus that had been converted to a food
There's
truck.
one in
It was-
Portland
It's
that's
really
a-
cool.
grilled cheese.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This one
many
was like
good
a chicken
food
taco
carts.
thing, but it was cool.
I love the Salem one because they have like 20 food trailers,
Mhm.
and the building where they serve the beer out of, it's really nice with plenty of TVs, and they have music going and plenty of seating in there. It's a very nice setup.
The one in Lebanon seems to be making doing a real good job of trying to be family friendly as well. They had like some kids games in one corner that the kids were playing on, and it was really enjoyable. Pretty nice. Well, I think that gives us, Angela, we have enough feedback on that topic?
Yeah, I'll work through Lebanon's code and then I'll get in touch with Albany too and just kind of look at some pros and cons and then try to put something together. Probably not I will try to do it by the 16th. We've got a lot of applications right now, so I will do what I can to try to put something together by the next meeting, but I am not going to make promises. But I will do my best.
As part of this, we're not going to have to deal with anything as far as OLCC requirements. That's all separate. That's all part of the permitting process with their
I
restaurants.
mean, some cities
And all
include
that.
stuff like that in their code, but there's really no need to.
It's
because
all spelled out.
It's already required.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have to go through, OLCC to get their, liquor licenses. All the food trucks, they have to do their health, inspections and their
Right.
health cards. So that'll be up to the owner of the property and then each individual carts to do all of the permitting and, that doesn't need to be included because that's something that the state is going to require of them individually. So
And I know that it might be part of OLCC, but it might not be. The fact that if they serve alcohol, it's an enclosed facility, that it have to have some kind of a barrier.
My understanding of the current rules for OLCC is that it's not so much enclosed so much as defined.
Right.
Like there's a
with
defined
small
serving
sensor.
area
Yeah.
that it has to be clear to somebody that they're entering an area where alcohol is served.
Right.
And so it's not so much a prison as it is just notifying people.
Yeah. Again, to use the barn, they have that small fence that runs all the way around.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's plenty of restaurants, that have
Outdoor seating.
sidewalk seating.
Yeah.
Where alcohol is served there, and there's no need for a little fence around each table. It's
Bow and Vine and Sarah that way.
Let me just make one other little comment, if it's helpful. You can go on the internet and just look up mobile food vehicles, carts, whatever. And I've been there before, and it'll tell you where you can park, where you can't park, what you think, if you park on private lands, what your lease payments would be expected. There's a lot of information on this subject on the internet.
Okay.
So Angela, you can do all the work.
Thanks, Henry.
All right. Any other comments on that topic? Okay. We'll get to work.
All right. We're going to be moving on to some exciting stuff in Article 3, reviewing the rewritten code. Yes. So if you're ready for a good nap, you may continue to remain.
Blair,
right.
I think I sent you where we left off on according to my notes.
17.70.
Actually,
Yeah.
put a sticky note in.
Yes, which puts us almost at the end of Article 3. So this section is residential accessory structures, and I'm just going to go through the comments that we had. So there was some discussion about the size of an accessory structure. And Walt's comment back was that the key is to keep it proportional to the residence and the lot size. So right now we have a limit of 864 square feet. And that's across the board, no matter what, if you have a residential accessory structure. Now that's not necessarily your shop or your shed or whatever. A residential accessory structure, if there's somebody living in it, you're limited to 864 square feet. In this updated code, it would have a change depending on the size of the structure and the location on the property, and when it comes to the lot area, it would fluctuate. So, like Walt said, the key is to make sure that you're not going to have a huge accessory structure right next to a huge house on a small lot. That you would have them proportional in some way, that the residential structure, the accessory structure has to fit within the current lot coverage or something like that, and is a percentage of the size of the principal structure. So what's present now is if it's up to 200 square feet, it can be in the side or rear yard, and there's no maximum area coverage for the accessory structure, and it's maximum height of 10 feet. That's envisioning like a shed. For 200 to 600 square feet, you're looking at side or rear yard, and it can't be more than 50% of the yard, and it's maximum height of 20 feet. And then over 600 square feet, we changed it to be the side or the rear yard there as well, and with 35% of the yard is the limit, and the maximum height is it just can't exceed the primary residence.
And this is pretty typical. So I don't know if you guys remember Dana, who was our contract planner for a little while. So in Bandon, we had a conversation about this because we had some accessory structures come up that were larger, that they wanted larger than 864 square feet, and they had, many acres of property. And this is pretty typical of what she told me Bandon and other cities in Oregon are doing. It's more of a percentage than it is a restricted size. So as long as you're not going over your lot coverage requirement and the heights of it, that's a pretty typical criteria for other cities around here. So
with that, we're just pitching the 864 and going to percentage.
Yes, it would go to these requirements. So you could do over 600 square feet, but it's going to look at how much area do you have, and it can't exceed the height of the primary residence let's see.
Makes sense.
For example, here in number 1, it says up to 10,000 square feet of lot area, the maximum size is 1,200 square feet. Over 10,000 square feet of lot area, the structure may be increased an additional 100 square feet for every 1,000 square feet of lot size.
Yeah, I like this new verbiage. It's gonna, because 864, although it might seem like it makes sense when we put it, like when it's there, it just brings up a question, why 864? Why
It's
not
a-
865?
It's
And right,
24 by 36 pole barn.
right, very
Yeah.
specific. But then when somebody, like Angela mentioned, is building on a big lot and they're building and they want something, then they want to know why 864 is the
Right.
limit. And this gives them, this is just for a future commission. It's like, or for the planning, you know,
Yeah.
it's like,
I
this
I
is just
personally
easy math.
I love this, and not just because we're getting rid of the random 864, which was always confusing.
Yeah.
But you know, even for my lot, I have a half an acre, and having an auxiliary structure that's limited to 864 square feet. You know,
It seems kind of arbitrary.
yeah. And I think this is more cut and dry, as the lot sizes are all over the place in town.
Mhm.
And it's, hey, you got a bigger lot, you can have a bigger building. And I love the fact that you cannot exceed the height of the primary residence.
Mhm.
So you're not going to have a 2-story shop going in behind, which we have.
Right.
There's some right on.
And frankly, that's the worst. That's
Yeah.
a much worse effect than
Yes.
having a larger square foot.
Yeah, and you
area.
can see the shop looming behind the house.
Mhm.
So I agree. This is, the verbiage in here is way more cut and dry,
Yeah.
easy to interpret.
Okay. Any other comments on that, on those adjustments? Okay. That brings us on to 17.72 has a couple of comments. We deleted a provision that said one off-street parking space shall be provided for each accessory dwelling. And then in addition, parking, so we deleted that initial part, so that now it just says parking shall be increased for the primary dwelling if needed, so that the primary dwelling is provided 2 off-street parking spaces. Rather than adding 1 for each accessory dwelling. And the reason that was deleted is that that's DLCD coming back and saying this is something that you have to change to comply with the new state mandates. So there we go.
Isn't that kind of redundant though, because we already require 2 off-street parking spaces?
It's basically just saying if you have a primary dwelling that is not in compliance
Okay.
already,
Then you have to.
and you're adding an ADU,
compliance.
you got to make sure that you're in compliance with
Okay.
that provision. We can do that. It's just apparently we can't require more parking spaces for the additional unit.
Okay.
All right. Coming up further down. There's a comment on building separation. So currently, we don't allow accessory buildings on adjacent properties without a conditional use. And they must adhere to the setbacks of the zone. So this would be hold on a second. Let me make sure oh, these are for attached dwellings. Never mind. Right. So for attached dwellings, this is for special residential dwellings, is 17.72. For any dwellings that are attached, so duplexes, townhomes, that kind of thing. The building separation is that if buildings are on adjacent properties but are not attached to each other, they shall be separated by a distance of at least 10 feet. If they are attached to each other, obviously there's no separation. But that's just to make sure that there's clearance between for fire purposes and such. And then there's a section that is added here that Walt added in because it's required by SB 8 on affordable housing provisions. And if you'd like, it's there for you to read. Would you like me to go through and read it? Affordable housing provisions. A, purpose to implement Oregon State Legislature Bills SB 8 and HB 2008, as well as enhance affordable housing opportunities in Sweet Home and open opportunities for affordable housing on land not currently zoned for residential development. Applicability is all land in the city of Sweet Home currently zoned C1, C2, and PF, public facilities, may be developed for affordable housing without a zone change application or process provided all conditions of this section and state law are met. All land in the city of Sweet Home currently zoned I may be developed for affordable housing without a zone change application and only if the property is A, publicly owned, B, adjacent to land zoned for residential uses or schools, and C, not specifically designated for heavy industrial uses. 3, the land is owned by religious organizations or government agencies or nonprofit organizations with housing development as their primary goal purpose. 4, the project shall develop affordable housing for those individuals or households with a combined annual income at or below 60% of the most recent Lynn County median income. C, application requirements. 1, application shall be made on forms prescribed by the city and shall demonstrate that all state and residential medium density R3 zone requirements are met. The following exceptions apply to the R3 zone requirements. A, density may increase by 150% of the existing density. B, structures may be increased in height by 24 additional feet. 2, the parcels proposed for affordable housing development shall not contain slopes greater than 25%, be located within the city's 100-year floodplain, or be identified as hazardous land. 3, the site, when developed, shall meet all state and county requirements for public safety, health, and habitability, as well as city utility, street, and water drainage requirements. D, affordable housing shall be administered through the site design review process contained in Chapter 17.102. So that's there because we have to include it. In a lot of ways, it's kind of not necessary because in the C1 and C2 zone, you can already build apartments.
But it doesn't state in here as far as affordable housing what that structure looks like.
Right.
So you could build a cottage cluster in a C1 zone without a conditional use permit if you call it affordable housing?
You have to, well, no, it's not saying that you still have to meet the conditional use. This is saying that a zone change application wouldn't be necessary.
Okay.
So you can still, if a conditional use is required for that type of housing, it would, my reading of this is that it would still apply.
And if we're updating our R1, R2, R3, do we want to change this?
This has already been changed to fit the so the R3. Hold on a second.
Because our medium density would be R2. Are we not correcting it to? Oh no.
We changed.
Yeah. R1 light low. R2 is medium.
Oh
R3
yeah.
is high density.
We need to, yes, Angela. This is using our current R3 being the medium density. When this code is adopted, R3 will be the high density. And so we need to change that to R2 in this draft. Yeah, although we may want to ask Walt if we're required to make it the high density zone in there, if he meant, if the mistake is in medium density or if the mistake is the 3.
Right.
One of them needs to change. Okay.
So that's just in that C1, correct?
Yes, that's the only
Not
place
seeing
I'm
it anywhere else. Okay.
Right. Okay. All right, so on 17.74, there's just a couple of comments there on temporary uses located within residential zones. There's just clarification, there's no contradiction here because there are some, when it comes to churches and schools, they would be, they're often in residential zones and sales like this can occur on those properties. Okay, and then just a comment on RVs, the rules for those special sales, that they can have temporary habitation in those. All right.
Real quick though, his
Yes.
comment that says a tent is not an RV, it
That-
doesn't state that. It's
Tent trailers.
tent trailer.
Yes. Yep. All right. 17.76 bed and breakfast establishments. So I did mention to Walt that you were interested in examining regulations on short-term rentals such as Airbnbs and felt that this section might be the best place for that. And I asked for his recommendation. Walt's comment was, would suggest a separate set of regulations outside of the development code. Making it a regulatory issue and not a land use matter provides greater flexibility for the city as circumstances change and experience improves.
And you had mentioned that in the past, so let's
something
do
that
that.
I can bring that before the council
Okay.
as the recommendation of the planning commission.
That would be good.
And then we'll take their direction from there.
Okay.
Right, the next time there's a comment is 17.80, our favorite section, wireless telecommunication facilities.
Did we find a different abbreviation?
Yeah, didn't we have a new one?
WTCF
Okay,
instead of WTF.
so telecom, TC.
Yes.
Okay.
So when we talked about this before, you'd asked about moving the definitions to the definitions for the entire development code because there hasn't seemed to be some very much consistency with that. Walt said, I re-examined Article 1 and 2 definitions were not placed in the correct order. I made the corrections. Reason for the duplication is that this is often a pull-out section where both definitions and regulations should be kept together, such as the floodplain. And so that
Where
was
you can photocopy
mainly so
one
that
page.
you can just hand off this one section to an applicant. And it may be a little bit redundant, but it's done for the convenience of the applicant. So one of the changes in the definitions was handoff. It was mainly just, I think, some formatting there and visual compatibility techniques. If you have any questions or about those. Again, we changed WTF to WTCF. I think that's just about it for that section. Oh, wait. Oh, there's just a comment there about what handoff sites are, and so there was a definition added for that.
So in here, with going back just a tiny bit to the Lattice Tower versus Monopole. So are we gonna separate the two styles of Lattice Tower, the guy wire tower like a radio, or the self-supporting Lattice Tower?
That's a good question. My understanding is that these were self-supporting, but let's look in the definitions and see if it says that.
I mean, the definition described as self-supporting, but maybe with adding the lack of additional guy wire for support.
The Lattice Tower, it defines it as a support structure constructed of vertical metal struts and cross braces forming a triangular or square structure, which often tapers from the foundation to the top.
Can we add self in front of it?
A self-supporting structure?
Supported structure.
I don't see why not. I think that would be a good adjustment. Okay. And then, let's see. Other comments were this the changing from WTF to WTCF. That's kind of it for that section. All right, the next area is in 17.82. Which is general standards. There's a addition for the setback from the South San Ann River, 75 feet. So, a clarification that is that it's 50 feet from the Wally and Ames Creek to South San Ann is 75. 50 was neglected previously.
Okay.
And then this is the final change to this section was in E at the end on exemptions. And this is again to comply with state law that it adds duplex dwellings as non-conforming duplex dwellings in a non-residential zone may be modified or expanded in compliance with development requirements of the R3 zone without the need to comply with the requirements and procedures of 17.108. And then it adds conversions of non-conforming single-family homes to duplexes in non-residential zones are similarly permitted without the need to comply with the requirements. And we need to add a D there. And procedures of chapter 17.108 when they do not increase the non-conformance. And that's again to keep us within state law. And that is the end of Article 3.
That doesn't change with the allowance now of duplexes in an R1 zone.
No, this is strictly talking about non-conforming things.
Okay.
All right, so should have pulled up Article 4 when I first started. Article 4. Which change looks like 17.96. So we changed the verbiage for this. So the applicability of interpretations is the purpose of this section is to provide a means to resolve potentially conflicting and unclear development code requirements and identify uses not specifically listed in a particular zone, but which are similar in character, scale, and performance to the permitted uses specified therein. So that is better.
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. Next one is in 17.102.060 design criteria for site development review. Walt's comment was that the audit, the code audit that was done for compliance with state law recommended more clear and objective standards. For example, establish specific levels of allowable noise levels. And this is something that you as a commission can consider. So what I guess what the state is concerned about is somebody trying to come having rules that aren't clear and too much discretion among officials that can stop something from being developed. And so I guess they're suggesting that E here, whereas provision for adequate noise and or visual buffering for non-compatible uses, etc. It doesn't really talk about specifically how loud it can be. In my experience, noise levels are incredibly difficult to enforce and are difficult standards to even set in the first place, and despite having a meter that can read it, they tend to be very subjective despite that objective standard. So I don't really have any recommendations to better comply with that recommendation. Since it is just a recommendation, you don't actually have to do anything, but they're basically pointing out that they're concerned about any rule that we might have that's not clear and objective.
Yeah, and enforcement for this is, like you say, almost nil. I mean, who has the equipment to measure it anyway? Maybe the police, but maybe not.
And even then, it's very difficult, and you have to be there at the right time.
Right.
So what we did do is we reworded B. So it says the proposed use will not create adverse negative impacts on the surrounding area, which tones it down and makes it a little less restrictive. Walt deleted the provision that said negative impacts resulting from traffic flow, noise, dust, glare, odor, potential incompatible adjacent uses such as parking lots or other impacts identified in the public hearing process. So it really loosened it up and made it so that it's not as restrictive. And I think that would probably satisfy anybody from the state looking at it.
Yep.
But
Yeah, and then
that's how it sits now.
it's a bit more specific down below about parking. So it talks about parking and traffic safety in D, and then noise and visual buffering in E.
Yeah.
So I think looks good to me.
If you're satisfied with those changes, we can move on. All right, next up is 17.108, non-conforming uses. There's an addition per OAR, an addition to the decision criteria for altering a non-conforming use or structure. And what it says here is now it adds this provision: conversion of an existing detached single-family dwelling to a duplex is allowed for a total of 2 dwelling units on a property, provided that the conversion does not increase non-conformance with applicable clear and objective standards in this code. So as long as if you have a house that's not conforming already, you could change it to a duplex. You just can't make it more non-conforming than it already is. When it comes to setbacks and lot coverage and things like that. Okay. All right, next up, let's scroll through. Under 17.114, zone map amendment and the submittal requirements. They removed the requirement for a site plan for a zone map amendment, and that's per comment from the audits now, or from the audit. I believe the reason for this is that when you have a zone change, a request for a zone change, there usually isn't often there isn't a complete plan yet for whatever is going to come in there, and that would be all done later in the development process. When you're changing a zone, it basically just changes what's allowed on that property and what the rules should be for that property. And so having a site plan basically gives away more information than is really necessary at that point. And I think what they're worried about is a developer that wants to do something that's completely legal and completely allowed in the right zone, and have people rejecting it based on that instead of whether that zone should have that particular use in it.
Right. And the site plan will come up during
It'll come up
the permitting
later.
process anyway.
Right, that'll come up during the building process. So for example, if there's a R1 zone property and there's a zone change request to change it to R3, so high density, the new R3. You're going from low density to high density, and the comp plan agrees with it, but you have to have a public hearing for it. They don't want to require the applicant to submit their whole plan for their apartment complex they want to put in, because then at the public hearing, everybody gets up in arms and says, we don't want this big, huge apartment complex in this area. The question is not whether you want the big apartment complex in that area. The question is, do you want higher density housing? and it doesn't matter what kind of housing it
Right.
is. That's what the criteria is to be discussed at that public hearing. And so they're worried about a developer having to basically put forward information that's going to bring more public comment against that,
Okay.
when it's something that's already allowed in that zone.
That might just help us too, because we often get sidetracked on
Sure.
issues unrelated to the
Yeah.
application.
And now, but it perfectly, you know, a developer is perfectly able to submit something anyway if they want. It's just not
Sure.
required. And maybe they're really confident in their development and want to say, look what I'm going to do. You know, that's certainly their prerogative. But it's not required.
Okay.
Right. That brings us on to 17.116, text amendments. There were some revisions that were made here. Specifically, we had asked for some language that would have more flexibility in the decision criteria on text amendments. And so Walt made some changes here. So the proposed amendment will not adversely impact the following: traffic generation and circulation patterns, demand for public facilities and services, level of park and recreation facilities, and protection and use of natural resources. We deleted one that was economic activities, and deleted one that was compliance with existing special purpose plans or programs, which just seemed to be too much.
What do you think of it, Henry? Looks good. The language, so that was
I'm okay.
less restrictive.
And then there was some additional language added then to the decision criteria for C there. Originally, it was just the proposed amendment complies with all applicable statewide planning goals and administrative rules requirements. And then it adds, in addition, amendments to the development code shall conform with applicable city comprehensive plan policies. It's kind of a no-brainer, but we're finding more and more that when it seems like things that they can remain unsaid just because everybody already knows them, inevitably we run across somebody who doesn't realize it should have been said in the first place.
A certain level of redundancy is always welcome.
Right. And next change. Boy, we're almost done with this one. Is there any more changes in here?
I can hear the Hallelujah chorus warming up.
Hey, no other changes in there.
Wow,
So that's the whole thing.
spectacular.
So the next step then is, well, first of all, if there's any final changes to this that we have not talked about up to this point, the next step is to schedule our public hearing. And at that public hearing, we can hear from the public, from comments from the public on what they think of the code, those who are brave enough to, or bored enough to go through and read the whole thing. And at that meeting, we have to have, is it 45 days notice, Angela?
Yes.
Yeah, we have to give DLCD 45 days notice. So we'll schedule that the soonest possible Planning Commission public hearing to comply with DLCD requirements. And at that point, you'll have the public hearing, and then you can formally make a recommendation to the city council that this be adopted.
And then they get to listen.
And then the city council gets to really listen to the entire thing in one big, long 6-hour meeting. What they decided to do.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that. That's
Oh, you get to.
Or you have to-
I get to.
Yeah.
I have to.
You should get double time for that or something.
I don't know. We'll see about that. But I might give Angela a break, and she won't have to go to the whole thing.
Maybe we could split it and share. You do half.
And you and I can switch off. The council members though can't. They they have to have their quorum and they can't switch quorums in the middle.
Right.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you can't have one.
Once you
meeting,
started,
one
you got to
start.
finish.
Oh,
But they can have a separate public hearing and then have it
Change
read
it
out
that
loud
way.
at a different meeting. Like they can have a public hearing first
Right.
to hear from the public, and then at a separate meeting, they can have the whole thing read for the
Right.
ordinance. Because the only reason it has to be read is because of our charter, not
Right.
because of our land use rule.
Right.
Anyway, that's
Okay.
that for the code. Any
Good.
comments, questions, concerns?
no.
Angela, just to remind you, I won't be at the next meeting.
Okay.
David told me I have to come if she's not coming.
All right, I made a note of it.
Right.
So any staff updates, upcoming planning projects?
Angela, you want to go ahead first?
I have, well, besides what I have here, I would say I have at least about 20 applications that I'm processing right now that are in different stages of review, between review, notice, and decision. So I'm not bored by any means. So a lot of property line adjustments, a lot of partitions. You'll see the new subdivision come up here on the 16th. You'll see the revision. We'll be coming back to that one. There'll be a variance, another variance coming in the 1st of July. But most of them are just property line adjustments and partitions, but there is a lot of them right now. We also have, some special event stuff starting with movies in the park. So I'm also working on that. And then we're starting our kickoff for Harvest Festival again. So there'll be a lot of that in the work, but just land use application and building applications are pretty much nonstop between Adam and I. We're not bored.
Yep. Things are busy.
Are they doing some work on the old mill property?
Are you referring?
Yeah,
Are you
David,
referring
what
to
is-
the? So there's the county-owned property that's on the south side of the tracks, or it was county-owned, and now has been part of it's been deeded over to FAC. That's next to our public works yard. There's been plenty of work going on there. I don't know of any work that has been going on in the mill property
I saw
itself.
them working on something on
It could be.
delivery mail.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know what they're up to. Nothing that requires a permit, I hope. I don't believe so. But on that note, things are proceeding with the FAC project to get that site ready, and it's moving along. So there's not a date, but we will be done with the city infrastructure quite soon. I think in the next couple of weeks we'll be done. The FAC needing to get the old City Hall annex moved in there and hooked up, and the site fenced. Those are going to be the main. I think the fencing will probably be more serious because it's just the supplies of fencing are
Yeah.
It's hard to
limited,
get.
and finding something that FAC can afford is hard. But yeah, so hopefully I don't know that we'll have a date because I'd probably be wrong if I suggested one. But it's moving. It actually is moving along faster than I expected. I was expecting it to drag out much longer, but we were able to get water pipe quicker than expected because we were fearing. We were told by the manufacturer, by the supplier, that he had no idea when it would come. We'd get it when we get it, and that other people have been back ordered for a long time. So we're glad that came through, and we just need Pacific Power to get their portion done, and we'll see.
Cool.
Other news, we did receive the plans for Samaritan's urgent care center, so that's good that they're moving forward with that.
They haven't announced any kind of groundbreaking date or anything
No.
like that.
But they are. We don't have the official. Actually, I think that is. Angela, do you know if that was the official permit application that they submitted? I think it was.
I think
Yeah.
it is, yes.
So they have officially applied for the building permits. So I imagine as soon as those are approved, they will schedule groundbreaking at that point.
Is there anything going on at the Hilltop Market location? That's near 49th.
I'm not aware of anything there. Do you? Are you, Angela?
No,
When they- what I
not
heard,
that I know of anyway.
when they gonna build a new building on that property that is tore that house down or something?
Well, the owner had tore down the neighboring, had acquired the neighboring property and tore down the house and had talked about different plans, but has not applied for anything. There was speculation among staff that maybe he was thinking fueling station, which would
I
be
wish they
great,
would
which would be
back
great
one
for
up
that end of
down there,
town.
'cause it's so far to-
In fact, they'd get a ton of boats in there. That's what they would end up with. But for whatever reason, nothing's moved forward.
So we have an Affordable Housing Act. Is there gonna be an Affordable Fuel Act generated at some point?
Doubt it. That's not my area of expertise.
Dying.
Yeah, I just filled up my truck yesterday and it just about killed me.
Can't afford to fill
Got to
it.
mortgage my house to fill that sucker
Yeah,
up.
well,
It's gonna be a train in your clunker is what it's gonna
Yeah.
be.
the boats staying in the carport all summer.
Yeah, if they were available, I'd be trading one in for a F-150 Lightning if I
Yeah.
could afford it.
Nothing's available.
They're not available yet.
No.
Or if they are, they're already spoken for.
Yeah.
All those computer chips could take a long time.
Well,
That's all
I
we've
guess
got
if
though. I
that's it, we'll maybe wrap up a little early tonight. Be able to see my wife before she goes to work.
She started her new business?
Oh, she's done a couple. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mainly just for cost of materials so she can practice, but they've all gone well. Yeah. So with that, we will adjourn our meeting for the Planning Commission June 2nd at 7:44.
I think since we're going home early, we should go over
See ya.
Grace laundry thing.
See ya.
And help them move some water.
Good
I
night,
gotta
all.
go spend money at the gas station.
Have a good night.
After it went up
Help
10
him eat the
cents.
ice cream. Is that what you want to do?
Help him eat the
Yeah,
ice cream.
that would be a-
Listen, I have
Have
ice
ice
cream
cream
that's left
social.
over. We've got a freezer full. Anybody wants an ice cream cone? I'll go down and dish it up for you.
Yeah. Well, you could win over some people, have a free ice cream cone day. Whew.
There apparently will be a public meeting on Wednesday night. You can bring it there.
Oh.
What-
What's Wednesday
One thing
night?
I haven't seen in
I
this
haven't put
town,
out the press release yet, but Wednesday night is supposed to be the city manager candidate
Oh.
presentation. Public meeting.
in Florida, it was real big. I don't see it in this town yet or in any other town. We used to have ice cream trucks that would go down through the neighborhood and just stop and kids would run out with $1 to buy ice cream.
Yeah, we used to have a guy that came by, yeah, he used to come by when we had 4-day school week, he would come by on Fridays.
You hear the little jingle,
Oh, yeah.
whatever that's.
Thank you.